Miroslav Jenča and Director General Rafael Grossi for your continued attention on this urgent matter of international peace and security. Madam President, last evening, U.S. military strikes targeted nuclear facilities in Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan with the aim of dismantling Iran's nuclear enrichment capacity and stopping the nuclear threat posed by the world's foremost state sponsor of terror. This operation sought to eliminate a long-standing but rapidly escalating source of global insecurity and to aid our ally Israel in our inherent right of collective self-defense, consistent with the UN Charter. For 40 years, the Iranian government has called for death to America and death to Israel, and posed a constant menace to the peace and security of its neighbors, the United States, and the entire world. Iran has attacked Israel with hundreds of ballistic missiles and through terrorist proxies. For decades, Iran has been responsible for misery and countless deaths across the Middle East. Iran's government and its proxies have also killed numerous Americans, including American service members in Iraq and Afghanistan. In recent weeks, Iranian officials have intensified their hostile bluster and rhetoric. Iran has long obfuscated its nuclear weapons program and stonewalled good faith efforts in recent negotiations. Madam President, the time finally came for the United States, in the defense of its ally and in the defense of our own citizens and interest, to act decisively. The Iranian regime cannot have a nuclear weapon. Let us be clear. Iran should not escalate. As President Trump said, any Iranian attack, direct or indirect, against Americans or American bases will be met with devastating retaliation. To fulfill its core mission of maintaining international peace and security, this Council must call upon the Iranian regime to end its 47-year effort to eradicate the State of Israel, to terminate its drive for nuclear weapons, to stop targeting American citizens and interests, and to negotiate peace in good faith for the prosperity and security of the Iranian people and all other states in the region. Madam President, a member state here today cast aspersions about hypocrisy and raised the forthcoming meeting on UN Security Council Resolution 2231. In that regard, I would point out that the recent IAEA report on verification and monitoring of Iran's noncompliance with obligatory nuclear safeguards shows clearly that Iran has been continuing to accelerate its nuclear activities without any credible civilian justification. We look forward to discussing the implications of this report and its broader implications on Tuesday, when the Secretariat briefs on the report on implementation of UNSCR 2231. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of the United States for her statement, and I give the floor now to the representative of Slovenia.
Thank you, Madam President. Secretary General, thank you very much for your remarks. And thank you also to Director General Grossi and Secretary General, Assistant Secretary General Jenča for their briefings. Madam President, this body is mandated to work for maintenance of international peace and security. There are moments in this chamber and outside, pivotal moments that shape our collective future. We believe today's debate is one of them. Slovenia denounces the sharp military escalation. This escalation risks to further exacerbate an already extremely dangerous and unstable regional situation and is threatening international peace and security. Therefore, we join the Secretary General's call on the parties to the conflict to disengage from further escalation and retaliation. We call for an immediate ceasefire. Madam President, we further call on the parties to the conflict to respect the UN Charter and international law, including the international humanitarian law. As we have been proven time and time again, violence and military conflicts lead nowhere but to an ever greater suffering of the innocent people of the Middle East. We are deeply alarmed about the toll of the ongoing situation on civilians, the chaos and the fear it is sowing. Madam President, Slovenia remains concerned about the size and unclear nature of Iran's nuclear program. We reaffirm our firm rejection of nuclear proliferation. At this point, I wish to express our full support to the work of the International Atomic Energy Agency and to you, DG Grossi. At this critical moment, with so much at stake, we must insist on diplomacy. A tailored diplomatic solution is needed. We welcome attempts of maintaining a diplomatic path in the recent days, namely the meeting of the E3 and the EU with Iran, and call on everyone else to follow this path. We call on the parties to the conflict and those with influence on them to prioritize diplomacy and peace and to return to the negotiating table. This must include Iran's nuclear question, leading us to establishing a credible, comprehensive, and verifiable solution, as well as dealing with other regional crises, including Gaza. Madam President, let me repeat. This is not a time for further escalations. This is not a time for retaliatory measures. It is time for de-escalation and diplomacy. It is time for peace. And we call on all leaders to show leadership for peace. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Slovenia for her statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Somalia.
Madam President, at the outset, Somalia wishes to thank the Presidency for convening the Council again in response to escalating and grave developments in the Middle East. We also extend our appreciation to the Secretary General for his introductory remarks, and to DG Grossi and ASG Yanka for their thorough updates on this worrying and rapidly evolving threat to international peace and security in the Middle East. The recent attacks on nuclear facilities of Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan in Iran represent a perilous escalation that threatens to engulf the entire region in an uncontrollable cycle of violence, suffering, and destruction. Somalia condemns any acts of aggression that violate the sovereignty and territorial integrity of member states. Such actions are in clear contravention of the principles enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations, in particular Article 2, Paragraph 4, which prohibits the threat or use of force against any state. We reaffirm the importance of respecting the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the Islamic Republic of Iran. Our delegation believes that all member states share responsibility to act in accordance with these principles and commitments. Madam President, at this critical moment, 4 urgent actions must guide our collective response. First, uphold international law and the UN Charter. We call for respect of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of all states, and adhere to the principles of good neighborliness, and to resolve disputes through peaceful means. Violations of these principles imperil countless lives and deepen regional crisis. Second, pursue de-escalation and comprehensive ceasefire. We urge all sides to work towards de-escalation and achieve immediate and unconditional ceasefire in order to restore calm and confidence-building measures. The Security Council must support every diplomatic initiative aimed at reducing tensions and preventing further conflict. Third, the return to negotiations on non-proliferation. Somalia reaffirms the urgent necessity of returning to negotiations regarding the Iranian nuclear program. Our delegation believes that the only viable path forward is a swift recommitment to talks on non-proliferation in line with relevant international resolutions. We further reiterate our call for the establishment of a Middle East zone free of nuclear weapons and for all regional states to join the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation and Nuclear Weapons. Lastly, protection of civilians and safeguarding nuclear facilities. We emphasize the paramount importance of protecting civilians and civilian infrastructure. Also, we urge all parties to exercise restraint and refrain from targeting nuclear facilities, particularly under IAEA safeguards, given the grave risks such actions pose to populations, regional stability, and the environment. Equally important is to guarantee freedom of navigation in international waterways and to refrain from actions that undermine maritime security. To conclude, Madam President, the challenges before us demand a collective, measured response rooted in dialogue, mutual respect, and a renewed commitment to multilateralism. Our delegation stands ready to engage constructively with the international community to advance peace, stability, and security for all states in the Middle East. We urge all parties to act with responsibility and wisdom, placing the well-being of the region's people above all other considerations. Our delegation echoes the SG call to give peace a chance and reiterates its call to seize this moment to redouble efforts for de-escalation and a return to negotiations and a sustainable diplomatic process. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Somalia for his statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Pakistan.
Thank you, Madam President, for convening this yet another emergency meeting of the Security Council. And I would also like to join colleagues in thanking the Secretary General for his remarks. You couldn't be clearer than that, Secretary General. Thank you. I would also like to thank ASG Shenka and Director General Grossi for their important briefings. Madam President, when the Security Council met for the second time last Friday, following Israel's wanton continuing aggression and unprovoked strikes against Iran, many members warned the international community of this grave violation of the UN Charter and the risk of dangerous escalation. We have heard the same today around the table from Council members as well as the Secretary General and other briefers. But tragically, developments over the past 24 hours have only confirmed those warnings. And it is unfortunate that the universal calls for de-escalation and a peaceful resolution of this crisis through dialogue have remained unheeded. From the outset, Pakistan has adopted a principled position on these developments, a position based entirely on international law and the UN Charter. We have thus strongly and unambiguously condemned the Israeli aggression, expressed solidarity and full support for Iran's inherent and legitimate right of self-defense in conformity with the Charter of the United Nations, denounced the unlawful Israeli unilateral strikes on IAEA safeguarded Iranian nuclear facilities, called for bringing an end to this aggression, advocated cessation of hostilities and for reverting to dialogue and diplomacy for a peaceful, lasting settlement of the Iranian nuclear issue. In recent days, Pakistan's leadership, including the Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister, has remained actively engaged in promoting those objectives through numerous and continuing contacts with leaders of other countries and our partners across regions, all in the interest of preserving international peace and security and in fulfillment of our responsibility as a member of the Security Council. The Council of Foreign Ministers of the OIC meeting in Istanbul has echoed the same call for ending the aggression and supporting de-escalation and a peaceful settlement. It is in this context that we are seriously concerned by the recent developments that have further heightened tensions. Pakistan has condemned the U.S. strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities, which come on the heels of a series of brazen attacks by Israel on the nuclear sites. Let me recall that specific targeting of nuclear facilities under IAEA safeguards constitutes a clear breach of international law, the IAEA statute, multiple IAEA resolutions, as well as Security Council Resolution 487. And according to Article 25 of the Charter, the members of the United Nations agree to accept and carry out the decisions of the Security Council in accordance with the Charter. That responsibility to carry out the decisions of the Security Council is heaviest with the members of this Council, particularly the permanent members in the first place. Madam President, we are deeply alarmed by the escalating situation. The sharp rise in tensions and violence as a result of the Israeli aggression and unlawful actions is profoundly disturbing. Any further escalation risks catastrophic consequences for the region and beyond. Pakistan stands in solidarity with the government and brotherly people of Iran during this challenging time. Madam President, these attacks set a dangerous precedent and pose a grave threat to the safety and security of populations across the region and indeed the world. As the body entrusted with primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security, the Security Council must act urgently and decisively. We share a collective responsibility to, first, unequivocally reject and condemn the attacks against the Islamic Republic of Iran since 13th of June, being in clear contravention of international law and the UN Charter. Threat or use of force must never be condoned. Article 2.4 is crystal clear in this regard, and so is Article 51. Second, denounce the attacks on IAEA safeguarded nuclear facilities, which violate Security Council and IAEA resolutions as well as international humanitarian law. Third, reaffirm the obligation to protect civilian lives and property on both sides. All parties must adhere fully to international law, particularly international humanitarian law. Fourth, call for an immediate cessation of hostilities and a complete ceasefire. Fifth, promote urgent recourse to dialogue and diplomacy consistent with the purposes and principles of the UN Charter to find a peaceful and lasting resolution to the Iranian nuclear issue. Madam President, in pursuit of these objectives, Pakistan has joined China and Russia in circulating a draft resolution. Among other things, this resolution calls for an immediate and unconditional ceasefire, urges all parties to refrain from further escalation, demands the urgent protection of civilians and civilian infrastructure, and supports a diplomatic path forward on the Iranian nuclear issue that is acceptable to all parties. And listening to similar concerns and priorities expressed by many of the Council members today, we sincerely hope that the draft resolution will receive the Council's support, enabling it to respond with unity and resolve urgently and effectively in line with the gravity of the situation. And Pakistan stands ready to engage constructively with all Council members in this regard. Madam President, the Middle East, already burdened by prolonged instability, history of Israeli illegal occupation, and continued denial of the Palestinian right to self-determination and statehood, cannot absorb another crisis. We must act now to prevent the situation from spiraling further out of control. History has taught us that the use of force and unilateral military actions only deepen conflicts and entrench divisions, with tragic human and humanitarian consequences. Dialogue and diplomacy remain the only path forward. These must be pursued with seriousness and sincerity by all. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Pakistan for his statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Algeria.
Madam President, I would like to thank you for the prompt scheduling of this meeting. I thank the Secretary General for his remark. We share your assessment that this is a dangerous escalation in the region already on the edge. And we echo your pressing call on member states to de-escalate and to uphold their obligation under the UN Charter and other rules of international law. I also thank ASG Jenka and Director General Grossi for their briefings. Madam President, the world, and especially the Middle East, cannot endure another war. Unfortunately, events in the region are accelerating in an alarming pace, pushing the Middle East dangerously close to an apocalyptic scenario. At a time when the international community was united, yes, was united in seeking ways to ease tensions, the situation has deteriorated sharply yesterday and further exacerbated by American strikes targeting Iranian nuclear facilities. Algeria expresses its deep concern and regret over this grave development, which significantly worsens the security and exposes the entire region to unprecedented risks with potentially uncontainable consequences. The erosion of the international nuclear security architecture poses a grave threat not only to regional stability, but also to the global peace and security. Attacks on nuclear facilities under international safeguards seriously undermine the integrity and credibility of the global non-proliferation regime. Therefore, we reaffirm that the legal framework safeguarding nuclear installations is clear, is comprehensive, is binding. Its very existence is precisely to ensure the highest levels of safety and protection for such facilities. The resolution of the IAEA General Conference repeatedly and explicitly state that, I quote, any armed attack on and threat against nuclear facilities devoted to peaceful purposes constitute a violation of the principles of the United Nations Charter, the international law, and the statute of the agency. These resolutions remain fully valid and applicable to the current situation. Under no circumstances should nuclear facilities be subject to attack. Upholding international law is not optional. It is a binding obligation upon all member states. Madam President, what lies ahead? What space remains for diplomacy? What responsibility rests with this Security Council? What we are witnessing today is a profound and perilous reversal. War has become the denial of diplomacy and politics by all means. Diplomacy, our job, long regarded as the primary tool for conflict resolution, is now being compelled to yield, to step aside, to allow force to take precedence. And this Council, for some, and especially for Middle East issues, its restraint, its silence, yes, silence, is seen as more useful than its action. What then of negotiation, of agreements, of the essence of the United Nations, its charter, its principles, and of international law? They too are being bypassed, negated, disregarded, and finally discredited. Future generations will remember not only what we said, but what we did, or what we failed to do. We, the Security Council members, especially the elected one. Madam President, to reaffirm Algeria's position clearly, the only viable path forward is a return to diplomacy, an approach rooted in international legality, the principles of the United Nations Charter and the pursuit of a peaceful resolution. We must collectively draw on the lessons of the region's painful history, which clearly shows that military solutions have never succeeded in resolving its complex challenges. Algeria reiterates again its firm call for an immediate ceasefire, a return to the negotiating table, and a sincere commitment by all concerned parties to finding a peaceful and negotiated solution to the Iranian nuclear issue, including the lifting of sanctions. Should I remind what the Charter clearly states? I quote, "All members shall settle their international dispute by peaceful means." End of quote. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Algeria for his statement. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as representative of Guyana. I thank you, Secretary General Antonio Guterres, for your presence here today and for your remarks. I also express our appreciation to Assistant Secretary General Miroslav Yencha and IAEA Director General Grossi for responding swiftly to our urgent request to brief the Security Council. Colleagues, just 2 days ago, we met in these chambers and made urgent calls for diplomacy and de-escalation in relation to the ongoing conflict between Israel and Iran. The Secretary General appealed to give peace a chance, and many of us echoed that call. Guyana, like so many other countries, including on this Council, has consistently called for Israel and Iran to exercise maximum restraint and to avoid any miscalculations that would further plunge the region into deeper crisis. Colleagues, for months, we have listened to the increasingly dangerous rhetoric and threats. However, what we need at this time is leadership and diplomacy. In this context, Guyana offers the following considerations. First, what is unfolding in the Middle East concerns us all. We must renew our calls for de-escalation and urge the concerned parties to step back and return to diplomacy and dialogue. We call on influential states to encourage the parties in this direction. Resist the temptation to fan the flames of conflict, given the potentially grave humanitarian and security impacts, as well as the attendant effects on global trade, including oil prices and food security. Second, we urge the members of this Council to urgently address the grave threat posed by this conflict to international peace and security, to uphold their obligations under the UN Charter, and take decisive action to end the hostilities. We must ensure that the parties avoid being trapped in a retaliatory tit-for-tat loop of violence that undermines regional and global peace and security. Finally, the headwinds we face are indeed testing our collective resolve. Guyana reiterates its call for all parties to abide by the principles of the United Nations Charter and to respect and uphold international humanitarian law, particularly the principles of distinction, proportionality, and precaution, and ensure the protection of civilians and civilian objects. We also reiterate that the right to self-defense absolves neither party of their responsibilities and obligations under international law. I thank you. I resume my function as President of the Council. Before opening the floor, I would like to remind all speakers that this is a formal meeting of the United Nations Security Council and of the need to ensure proper decorum in the delivery of their statements and to refrain from personal attacks. I now give the floor to the representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Thank you. In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful, thank you, Madam President, for your valuable effort to promptly convening this emergency meeting in your capacity as the President of the Security Council. We welcome the presence of Secretary General at this meeting, and we also listen to the statement made by the ASG, Mr. Jenka. We appreciate all those members who have chosen to stand on the right side of history and thus strongly condemned the act of aggression of the United States and the Israeli regime against my country. Madam President, I address this Council today for the third time since the brutal aggression against my country, first by the Israeli regime on June 13th and now by the United States. I speak with utmost urgency and grave concern on behalf of our people, a peace-loving nation of nearly 100 million people. Today, another stain was recorded in the political history of the United States. After the illegitimate Israeli regime failed to do the worst dirty work, Trump was forced in the early hours of Sunday, June 22, to personally carry out the most sordid part of this vile agenda. Once again, the internationally wanted war criminal Netanyahu succeeded in hijacking U.S. foreign policy, dragging the United States into yet another costly, baseless war. America has once more recklessly chosen to sacrifice its own security merely to safeguard Netanyahu. Once again, the world has witnessed the blatant corruption of the U.S. political system and its leaders. As an independent, peace-seeking nation, the Islamic Republic of Iran had repeatedly warned the warmongering U.S. regime to refrain from stumbling into this quagmire. Even though Iran reserves its full and legitimate right under international law to defend itself against this blatant U.S. aggression and its Israeli proxy, the timing, nature, and scale of Iran's proportionate response will be decided by its armed forces. Throughout history, the resilient and united Iranian nation has withstood deeper wounded and faced more vicious enemies, and this time too. It will show its dignity, strength, and greatness to the world. Over the past 10 days, the Israeli barbaric assault, the international bodies, including the UN Security Council and the International Atomic Energy Agency, have been provided with all the necessary information and warning. Yet, they have proven once again that the so-called 8 decades-long quest to prevent war and aggression is hollow and powerless in practice. Madam President, history will not forget these tragic days. It is profoundly heartbreaking that a peace-loving country, one of the founders of the United Nations with over 5,000 years of culture and civilization, responsible party to the UN Charter and the NPT, and non-nuclear weapon state, has been under armed attack by an illegitimate regime, no by its chief backer, the United States, but poses thousands of nuclear warheads. The United States, a permanent member of this Council, the depositary of the NPT, and the only state that has ever used nuclear weapons, murdering millions in 2 cities, has now once again resorted to illegal force, waged a war against my country under a fabricated and absurd pretext preventing Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons. What a bitter and tragic irony. Madam President, this US and Israeli regime aggression is a clear and flagrant breach of international law. It breaches the primary norms of prohibition of aggression and the very fundamental principles enshrined in the UN Charter, namely Article 2.4, which categorically prohibits the threat or use of force against the sovereignty and territorial integrity of any member state. This illegal act also violates the Charter, a statute of the IAEA, relevant resolution of the Agency General Conference, Security Council Resolution 487 and 2231, as well as the NPT itself. Colleagues, while the representative of the United States continues to make baseless accusations against Iran, the international community is well aware of the well-documented and dark record of military intervention, illegal use of force against other sovereign states, and sponsorship of terrorism by the United States in the Middle East and across the world. The facts speak for themselves. All US allegations against Iran are unfounded, with no legal basis and politically motivated. One clear example is the horrific and cowardly assassination of martyr Major General Qasem Soleimani and his companions. He was cowardly and deliberately assassinated while visiting Iraq at the formal request of the Iraqi government. This crime, carried out by the United States forces on direct order of the then President of the United States, who yesterday again claims the responsibility for such a heinous crime. Major General Soleimani remains a hero for our people and the nation in the region for countering terrorist groups, in particular Daesh. Madam President, from its illegal invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan to its catastrophic intervention to Libya, the United States had ignored the UN Charter, shattered entire societies, and destabilized the region for decades. The people of these countries continue to pay the price for these reckless policies. Madam President, Israeli attack on June 13 and the US aerial strike on June 21 did not occur in vacuum. They are a direct result of the illegal and politically motivated actions of the United States and its European partners, the United Kingdom, France, and Germany, as well as biased conduct of the IAEA Director General. Undoubtedly, the United States, the UK, and France, three permanent members of this Council, along with the Israeli regime and the IAEA General Director, will bear full responsibility for the death of innocent civilians in Iran, especially women and children, and for destruction of vital civilian infrastructure. Madam President, Iran was preparing for the next round of diplomatic engagement with the United States on June 15, only for Israel to strike Iran 2 days before those talks could take place. In fact, Israel decided to destroy diplomacy. The so-called offer of diplomacy was nothing more than a deceitful policy to mislead the international community. This week, as our foreign minister held talks with the E3, European Troika, and the European Union, the United States decided to destroy the diplomacy. What conclusion can be drawn from this situation? From the perspective of Western countries, Iran must return to the negotiation table. But as Iran's foreign minister mentioned, how can Iran return to something it never left, let alone? Madam President, the pattern is evident. The NPT, a cornerstone of non-proliferation regime, has been manipulated into a political weapon. Instead of granting parties legitimate right to peaceful nuclear energy, it has been exploited as a pretext for aggression and unlawful action that jeopardize the supreme interest of my country. The selective double standards behavior of IAEA board and the Security Council turning a blind eye to Israeli past attack on Iraq's Osirak reactor, its assaults on Iran nuclear sites under IAEA safeguards, and its ongoing aggression is a moral, political, and legal disgrace. This shame will forever tarnish the credibility of these international bodies. With such blatant bias, there is no assurance that the other NPT member will not face similar aggression. Madam President, for more than 2 decades, Israeli, an outlaw nuclear-armed regime that refused to join the NPT despite Security Council Resolution 487, has promoted the deceitful and false narrative that Iran is on the cusp of acquiring a nuclear weapon, while there has not been even one shred of evidence to substantiate such baseless allegation. Iran's consistent diplomatic engagement made in good faith, leading to the JCPOA and its full compliance with the commitment therein with the UN Security Council Resolution 2231, demonstrate the very peaceful nature of its nuclear program. Madam President, Iran is acting within its inherent unlawful right of self-defense under Article 51 of the UN Charter. We will take all measures deemed necessary at our disposal to protect our people, our sovereignty, territorial integrity, national and vital interests, and our peaceful nuclear program in accordance with international law. Once again, I would like to remind this esteemed body of its legal and moral obligation. If this Council and the United Nations built to maintain international peace and security fail to act at this decisive moment, they will forever lose their credibility and relevance. Israel and the United States are the chief culprits for eroding the rule of law, undermining international law, the IAEA statute, and the non-proliferation regime. However, the silence, double standards, and complicity of international organizations and some Western countries, including France and the UK, are equally reprehensible. The UN Security Council should immediately act under Chapter 7 of the United Nations Charter to redress such injustice and gross violation by strongly condemning the blatant aggression, violation, and heinous crimes committed against the Islamic Republic of Iran, adopting effective enforcement action against the aggressor, hold the United States and Israeli regime fully accountable, place the Israeli nuclear facilities under agency safeguard. This is a historic test for this Council, for the United Nations as a whole. Every state and every responsible actor must rise to this occasion and condemn without ambiguity. These blatant crimes, failure to do so, will lead to the gradual decline of the very aspiration of the non-proliferation regime and normalize a dangerous precedent when might, our rights, right, and where the fundamental principles of the UN Charter are trampled without consequences. Madam President, distinguished colleagues, we stand at the crossroads. Let us be the moment we put an end to impunity, the moment we uphold the principles on which this Council was founded. This Council must act decisively. Silence will be complicity in these crimes. If this Council fails to act and condemn this blatant aggression, the stain of complicity will forever remain on its conscience, as it does with Gaza. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran for his statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Israel.
Thank you, Madam President. First, I would like to thank the Secretary General, ASG Yancha, Director General Grossi, for your remarks. Madam President, last night, history changed. The United States of America struck Iran's nuclear sites at Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan. The United States, the leader of the free world, removed the greatest existential threat facing the free world. Just like our Operation Rising Lion, this was not a war of choice. This action was a necessity. It was a righteous act for the United States, for Israel, for the Middle East, and for the world. So the entire world should say on record today, here and now, thank you. Thank you to the United States for removing the greatest threat to global security. Thank you, President Trump, for acting when so many hesitated. Thank you for protecting the free world with strength and with moral clarity. Now, some come here to denounce the United States and Israel. So let me ask you, where were you? Where were you when Iran raced toward the bomb? Where were you when it enriched uranium far beyond the point of civilian usage? When it buried entire fortress beneath mountain to prepare for our extermination? Where were you when Iran turned negotiation into theater and deceit into strategy? You were silent. You were complicit. You were afraid. You were bystanders. Months ago, I sat before this council and called for a coalition of the courageous. I called for a coalition with the moral clarity and strength to confront the greatest threat our world has seen since the Second World War. Last night, the leader of the free world acted with that courage. The United States acted, not just for itself, but for every nation that values freedom over radicalism. For every nation whose children deserve to grow up without the shadow of a nuclear disaster hanging over their heads. Now, the world must follow suit. Madam President, we have heard many calls for diplomacy today in this chamber. We have heard the Secretary General calls for de-escalation. You cannot ignore that diplomacy was tried over and over. The United States led that effort. Many nations here in this room engaged in diplomacy with determination and good faith. But the regime in Tehran had other plans. It used the negotiating table as camouflage, a delay tactic, a way to buy time while building missiles and enriching uranium. Iran negotiated agreements it never intended to keep. It made commitments it never honored. It answered deadlines with defiance and met oversight with obstruction. The free world gave it every chance. We gave it months, we gave it years, we gave it every possible off-ramp. Iran would not move. So it had to be moved. The regime goal was never peaceful energy. Its goal was death and destruction. Its nuclear program was not a diplomatic puzzle. It was a loaded gun pointed at the heart of the international system and the stability of the world. To those who now fake concern and cry escalation, we say, this is what the last line of defense looks like, when every other line has failed. Make no mistake, the cost of inaction would have been catastrophic. A nuclear Iran would have been a death sentence just as much for you as it would have been for us. Madam President, while Iran fired rockets at synagogues, mosques, schools, and homes, the United States acted with precision, as does Israel. Israel's targets are not cities. They were not civilians. They were not homes or schools. They are ballistic missile launchers and nuclear sites. This is a moral difference between us and them. They seek chaos, we seek order. They build weapons to destroy the world, we build partnerships to protect it. As you all know, we have already gained air superiority across Iranian skies. We have acted with purpose. We have acted with restraint. and we will act with the moral clarity that has always defined our people. Iran's reach extends far beyond our borders. It arms militias in Iraq, it commands terror in Lebanon, it funds Houthis in Yemen, it plots murder in Europe, and it threatens every capital in the West with its growing arsenal of ballistic missiles. You cannot sit this one out. You cannot condemn the firefighters while the arsonist tries to light more fires. You cannot protect peace by appeasing evil. Colleagues, Israel did not seek this moment. But when that moment came, we did not flinch. We know what happens when the world turns a blind eye to threats too terrible to imagine. This time, we acted. And this time, we were not alone. Let the record show, when the world stood at the edge of a nuclear disaster, America stepped forward. When time ran out, America showed courage. And when the moment came to confront the forces of extinction, America led. Now it is time for the rest of the world to guarantee that the threat of a nuclear Iran never returns. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Israel for his statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Kuwait.
شكرا سيدة الرئيسة.
Thank you, Madam President. Allow me at the outset to wish you and your friendly country to thank you for quickly calling for this meeting, and to thank the Secretary General for being here and for his righteous words at the start of this session. I also thank Mr. Miroslav Rensha and Mr. Grossi for their valuable briefings. Ladies and gentlemen, members of the Security Council, on behalf of GCC countries, that include the State of United Arab Emirates, the Kingdom of Bahrain, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the State of Qatar, the Sultanate of Oman, and my country, Kuwait, we reiterate that the GCC group follows with grave concern the accelerating developments in the region, particularly the most recent developments that included the targeting of nuclear facilities inside Iran, in a dangerous development that threatens regional and international peace and stability. GCC countries warn against the repercussions of the continuation of this escalation that could lead to further tensions and exacerbate risks that face the security of the region and its peoples. We call for an immediate cessation of military actions and exercise of maximum restraint, avoiding anything that could lead to a spillover of this conflict, while reiterating that dialogue and diplomatic means are the best means to address conflicts and reach peaceful solutions. In this context, GCC countries reiterate the importance for this Council and the international community to shoulder their responsibilities fully towards stopping these violations, and to genuinely work on ensuring the respect of the sovereignty of states and the safety of their critical facilities, including nuclear facilities that are under the IAEA safeguards regime. GCC countries express their deep conviction that there needs to give priority to diplomacy and dialogue to settle conflicts and disagreements within comprehensive approaches that achieve stability, prosperity, and justice. And we reiterate the importance of doubling efforts that aim at finding political solutions to put an end to this crisis and open a new page of security and stability in the region. In conclusion, Madam President, GCC countries are firmly committed to support all regional and international efforts aiming at diffusing this crisis and consolidating security and stability, and to preserve the interests of peoples in the region and the world. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Kuwait for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Iraq.
شكرا السيدة الرئيس.
I thank you, Madam President. I thank you for and value your efforts in convening this emergency session. We thank His Excellency the Secretary General for participating in this meeting and acknowledging the gravity and the repercussions of the current situation and his calls for de-escalation. We thank the Assistant Secretary General as well as the Director General of the IAEA. Madam President, the Security Council meets today in an emergency session, and it bears upon its shoulders the task of maintaining international peace and security at a time when our region is witnessing a dangerous escalation that threatens to destabilize the world and the region. Iraq speaks in a moderate voice and expresses its extreme concern over the accelerating and dangerous developments that the region is witnessing, at the forefront of which is the ongoing military escalation and the ensuing military attack against 3 nuclear reactors in Iran. And we believe in Iraq that this attack is a dangerous escalation and a direct threat to regional and international peace and security. It risks increasing the chances of conflict and the chances of the war expanding as other regional and international parties join the fray with no authorization by the Security Council. This raises serious questions on the respect for the global order that is based on international legitimacy. Madam President, the developments that the region and the current conflict have witnessed is a true test of the rules-based international system that is based on international law and the UN Charter. Unilateral actions that bypass the Security Council weaken the prestige of the international organization and keep the door open to military chaos with unpredictable consequences. Moreover, targeting nuclear facilities, regardless of the disagreements over such facilities, is a dangerous precedent that runs counter to diplomatic efforts that aim to resolve the nuclear file through dialogue and international controls, especially the role of the IAEA in this matter. Iraq confirms that targeting declared nuclear facilities is a dangerous precedent in the non-proliferation regime and the comprehensive safeguards regime, as indicated in the Resolution 487 as well as the IAEA Board of Governance. It also runs counter with Article 4 of the NPT Treaty, which guarantees all member states the right to develop and use nuclear energy for peaceful purposes within a framework of transparency and international oversight. Targeting nuclear facilities could lead to catastrophic radiation leakage that would go beyond the borders of the targeted state and would pose a direct threat to the lives of nearby human beings and the environment, including Iraq. We note the dangerous nature of cross-border radiation leakage and how it affects the countries and peoples of the region. This is a serious danger, and we warn of the dire environmental and human consequences of this. We regret to note that this military development has narrowed the timeline and diplomatic horizon for a potential peaceful resolution. Moreover, it did not give negotiations and political attempts to resolve tensions a chance. It also prevented the IAEA from performing its technical role in accordance with its mandate as stipulated by its statute, which is to verify the nature of nuclear activity. Madam President, our region and over the past decades has witnessed repeated situations of tension and instability. Our peoples have suffered from war and conflict that have brought death upon the people and destruction upon the infrastructure and have obstructed development offers. We find ourselves today before a dangerous crossroads that threatens to ignite a comprehensive and all-out regional war, with the ensuing violation of the sovereignty of states through repeated violations of their airspace and territories as neighboring states, with the catastrophic economic impacts of that, as global supply chains are experiencing severe disruptions and the economies of the region are facing major challenges. And as threats continue to endanger maritime passages, which are the lifeline of international trade and the economy of states, Iraq, and based on its geographic location and regional role, is directly impacted by these developments. We have recorded repeated violations of our airspace by the conflicting parties. We consider this a violation of the sovereignty of Iraq and a violation of international law and the United Nations Charter. We renew our firm belief, our firm rejection that Iraq absolutely rejects the use of its territories or airspace to carry out military operations that harm the safety and security of any state in the region, regardless of the party involved or the purposes invoked. In closing, Madam President, Iraq stresses the need to reinstate trust in joint international action. The Security Council must once again be the main forum where crises are handled. We stress the importance of respecting the sovereignty of states whose territories and airspace must not be used in any military confrontation without their consent. Iraq calls for bolstering diplomatic solutions and for activating negotiations and for learning from the lessons of past crises in the region. Iraq calls for the protection of civilians from any military action that affects them directly or indirectly. The peoples of our region are looking to this Council and expecting it to shoulder its historic and legal responsibilities at this crucial juncture, so that wisdom and dialogue would prevail, so that we must work together to lay down the foundations of stability and peace in the region, foundations of justice and the respect for international law and international humanitarian law. We call on all parties to avoid further escalation and to return to serious and responsible dialogue in order to maintain the stability of the region and the world. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Iraq for his statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.